All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Joanne Snap, and today we're going to be talking about a checklist for those who are applying in the spring. And so we have a lot of things we need to do. It's April now. We're going to be doing a lot of things before the application opens here in just over a month. So let's get started. I wanted to start with the timeline over the next few months so that you can see what everything looks like when we kind of spread it out. The next slide will have everything in a list form, but I wanted to kind of talk through what the next few months are going to look like for those who are applying. So here we are, it's the beginning of April. And at this point, if you are applying to medical, dental, PA, any of the health professions, at this point, you probably should have a personal statement that is well underway. If you do not have a personal statement that is drafted and being actively edited, I would strongly recommend starting that process now because this is a very competitive process. I don't need to tell you that. And it takes a lot of revisions to make a piece of writing good. And so you never want to submit first draft writing to an application. I would start that process, go get professionals to read it, have lots of eyes on it, but not too many eyes, but just enough eyes where you can get some feedback and hopefully get it edited really well. You also need to write your experience description. So although the personal statement is really important, it's 5,300 characters for our pre-meds, 5,400 for our pre-dental. The experience description is actually almost double that. So once you write all of your experiences with the three meaningful, it comes out to about 10,000 characters. So it's a lot of writing also you need to do. And so you don't want to put that off and wait till the last minute to do your experience writing. So that needs to get started, and you have 15 experiences to write there. At this point, you should also have your letter writers confirmed. So you are going to need some letters of rec. I'm going to go through that more specifically, but you're going to need those people. You need to give them notice, at least 30 days notice before you need their letter. So asking now is a really good idea if you haven't done that, because oftentimes professionals are busy and they sometimes can't respond to you right away. And so if they don't respond to you, you want to follow up with them in a couple of weeks, and that may take 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks before you get a response. So start emailing people now. If anybody goes ahead and says yes to you, then you can either open up an Interfolio account and add them in there, or just let them know that your application will be opened in 1 month and you can add them into the application. Most of you will end up taking the Casper or the Preview or both, depending on your school list. Most pre-meds end up taking Casper and Preview, and most pre-PA and dental applicants take Casper. So if you have not registered for those two tests, you need to do that. And I know this is a lot because some of you are also still planning on taking the MCAT sometime in the next few weeks. And so I would not take the Casper and Preview until after you've finished the MCAT. They are tests-ish, but they're not tests you really study for. They're not things you cram. They're things you would practice in the sense of fully understanding what the test includes and understanding just sort of what they're looking for. And there are practice preview tests on the preview site, along with a list of schools that require that. And then Casper, you can find lots and lots of Casper prompts on the internet. I would time yourself. You go onto Acuity Insights website to create your account. You can find all the information about Casper on there, but I would absolutely get started on those, getting registered for those because the seats do fill up. Okay, so depending on which health profession you're applying to, depends on when the application opens. CASPA, the PA application opens in April, on April 30th. But medical and dental schools and a lot of others open in May. PT, some other professions open in July. So you are very close to being at the point where you're going to have your application opened. Once your application opens, there are a couple of big logistical things you need to do first. The first thing you want to do is add your schools into your application so that you can send your transcripts. It's very important you do this fast and early because sometimes transcripts have some issues and you don't want to be waiting until the last day and then experience some issues that will delay your submission. So send your transcripts as soon as you get your application open, but not sooner. You can't send your transcripts before you open up your 2027 application. And the reason why is in the application, there is a transcript request form, and you need to have that ID number handy when you order your transcripts. So you have to wait till you open your app, then you send your transcripts, and then the application systems will receive them. Don't send your transcripts to the schools. The schools do not see your transcripts. When you enter in your coursework into the application, you need to copy from an official transcript, because even sometimes the unofficial transcripts or grades you see on your online portal don't match what's on the official. So you need to have an official transcript in front of you, which means you might want to order that right now. Okay, after we have our application open, you're going to spend the month filling it out, fine-tuning any last pieces. Strongly recommend having some people read your primary app all the way through before you submit, because you do not want to have any typos in your application. Absolutely no mistakes when you submit your application to medical school. So lots and lots of eyes, make sure it's perfect. You cannot submit your application in AMCAS until May 27th. This is not true for all the applications. So for example, if you're applying to MD and DO schools, you do not have to wait until the end of May to submit your DO application if you wanted to apply to DO schools early. One of the big differences between MD and DO, though, is that for DO, you have to have your secondaries written when you submit. So that kind of slows people down a little bit. And to be really honest with you, you do not need to submit your DO application in May. You can wait until June or July and you will still be totally fine in that process. So despite what the world will tell you about rolling admissions, the process for interviewing goes all the way until the following May. It's a long year. It's not that they're in a mad rush and they're going to fill their class in the first 2 months. Schools interview all the way through the following spring. So I would do your AMCAS first if you're doing MD and DO, get that done, and then start your DO application. And you do have to write those secondaries as you submit each school. So that, like I said, that takes you a little bit of time. All right, once you submit your application, then that starts the verification process. And verification simply means that schools are cross-checking the grades that you entered into your application against what was on your official transcript. And so this is where you have time. There's nothing really you can do during verification. They're doing their work on their end and you're waiting for your app to be verified, which can take anywhere from 1 week to 6 weeks. They say 6 to 8 weeks. I don't think I've ever seen an app take 8 weeks. So the sooner you submit, the faster it should be, but that also depends on other factors, like if you have any transcripts that are missing, that will slow down verification. If you have multiple transcripts, you might be verified a little bit slower than someone who has one transcript. But during the month of June, you have time. That is when I would start pre-writing your secondaries. So the average California applicant applies to around 20 to 30 medical schools when they apply. 30 schools ends up being about 50 pages of writing in secondaries. 50. That's a lot. And trying to do 50 pages in July is not feasible. So if you can start writing early, that would really help you. You can pull the prompts from online. You can search them up. They come up pretty quickly. Make sure they're the right year from last year. Now, the thing is about that, the prompts can change. The schools can change the prompts. But it would be better to start that process and risk some of the prompts changing than just waiting until July and starting from scratch. So you could do some of the more common questions in June, like what are your gap year plans, a challenge you've overcome. Those are really common questions. I doubt they're going to go away totally. So you could start writing some of that stuff and get that started. Once your app is verified, you are going to receive a whole bunch of emails. You do not have to add all of your schools into your application when you submit it. If you don't want to get 30 emails, you can also do this in batches. So you can add 10 schools in at a time. When you submit your app, just add 10 schools and you'll get your 10 secondaries. You can submit those and add 10 more and then submit those. Generally, we do want to submit our secondaries within 2 to 3 weeks. So if you add 30 schools in and you have not pre-written, you are going to have a lot of schools that are sitting for a long time, more than 2 or 3 weeks, because you cannot write 50 pages in 2 weeks. So it would be better in that case to kind of batch them and do them in smaller groups. That way it's not so overwhelming to you and the schools are not waiting as long to get their secondaries. Yes, they're getting your application later, but the time between getting your app and having the secondary submitted is shorter, which is more ideal than having them sit on secondaries for 30 days. So July, don't make plans. If you're applying this season, you have no plans in July besides writing. That is what you're going to do the whole summer. If you had planned a trip, you have created a little bit of a situation for yourself, unless you plan on writing the whole time on your trip. So July is secondary season. That is going to be all consuming. A lot of people get done in July. A lot of people don't get done in July. If you don't get done in July, obviously try to wrap it up in August. I have had a lot of folks who are still writing in September. It's not ideal. So they're not going to read your application until your secondaries are submitted. And so even though, I know they're not going to fill their entire class with the first group of people, a lot of people who submit in August and September still get interviews. But it also, when we say rolling, it also depends on when you get your interviews. So if you submit early, you're likely to get your interviews early. And if you submit in September, you may not be getting interviews until January. So it's not that you won't get interviews, it just may last, the process may drag on a little bit longer, which is, better than no interviews, but it does cause a lot of stress when you haven't heard back for a few months. So we try to get our secondary submitted by August at the latest. And then September is a lot of waiting. I would encourage you to start doing interview prep. Interviews can come out between August and all the way through the following, truthfully, like April, May even. And if you don't hear back immediately, it does not mean anything. Lots of people don't hear back for interviews until, after October. So you still want to practice. I would start practicing interviews early because interviews come fast and furious. You could get invited to interview and your interview is 3 days later. And so if you have not done any prep, it is going to be stressful for you if you get an interview 3 days later. So I would work with somebody and start prepping your basic questions like tell me about yourself, why medicine, challenges, things like that, common questions. That way, if you do get an interview very quickly, at least you have something prepared. And so interview season goes all the way through the following March. Schools cannot start accepting, medical schools cannot start accepting until October. Dental schools don't accept until December. PA schools roll out acceptances really early. So I've had people who are accepted in the summer for the following year. And so it really depends on the profession, but usually schools let you know within 2 to 3 weeks after the interview, not always. After March, people are doing financial aid packages and figuring out where they're moving and getting apartments and all that fun stuff, going to revisit weekends. So the whole process after you apply takes a year, and there's a lot going on. If you are applying while you're still in school, that's a lot to do all of this while still taking classes. If you have graduated, that's a lot easier. You're going to be working full time and doing this. A little bit more manageable when you're not trying to, handle all the classes. So let's look at this in list form if you want to take a screenshot of that. This is everything I just said, but kind of broken down into a list. One thing I didn't mention in the April is I mentioned your personal statement in the work and activities section, but I did not mention the impactful experience description. And I meet a lot of people who don't know what this is. So this is not your most meaningful. In the work and activities section, there is a most meaningful description. You have 3 of them. The impactful experience is a separate piece of writing that is in the biographic information section, and it is intended to be used almost like the former disadvantage statement, where you reflect on how something that's happened in your life has impacted you in your journey to medicine. And so it's not most meaningful. Most meaningful are stories that show how you've grown or changed. Impactful is a little bit more about your personal life. And so you also in April could start creating your school list, although truthfully, that's something we can do all the way through May. I've already said everything for May, June. Schools don't actually start receiving your application until the end of June. So even if your app gets verified in the first week of June, they're not going to see anything until after June 26th. So there's no reason to stress. If your app gets verified, they're just sitting on it, you're sitting on it, nothing's happening. When you submit your secondaries, though, a lot of schools are going to ask you for a headshot. So if you don't have a professional headshot, you could do that in the month of June. You do not need to go pay for a professional headshot. When I say a professional headshot, I simply mean a picture of your face where you look decent. You can just put on a nice shirt, stand in front of a blank wall, and have a friend take a picture in portrait mode, and that will be good enough for a headshot for secondaries. But you just need to have that ready. And also, you might want to work on your resume because some schools will ask for a resume, more common with DO schools, and you'll want to have that ready to submit. And then, of course, we talked about what happens in July. You get your secondaries. So if you have not looked into this fee assistance program already, I really encourage you to do that before you apply. It's getting kind of late now, but it would be better than not having it if you do qualify. Because if you are eligible for fee assistance, you will receive up to 20 free schools in AMCAS, and you get almost all of your secondaries waived. The other health professions fee assistance programs are truthfully not as great as AMCAS's. So a lot of people opt to not do the other ones just because the amount of money for the work involved is not worth it. But if you want to do it, definitely look into it. If you can save a few $100s, why not, right? And then this is a description of the impactful experiences that I was mentioning. These are some examples of what you could talk about in your impactful experience if you choose to write that. And then for your work and activities section, I frequently meet with people who don't quite know how this works. So for AMCAS only, you are going to have 15 experiences, and for each experience, you're going to write 700 characters, and you're going to describe what did you do and what did you learn. So this is really short, maybe 4 sentences, 5 sentences max. And so the first sentence is kind of big picture context. Where were you working? What was, if you were scribing, how many providers did you scribe for? What kind of practice were you in? But by the last line, you really want to have a concrete takeaway of something you grew, or some way you grew, or something you learned from that experience. So those 700 characters are one box. They each go into, they each have their own box under each description. The 1325 character descriptions for the most meaningful are a separate box. So the biggest mistake I see people make is they'll combine the two and just, have a 2,000 character piece of writing, but you can't do that because they're 2 different boxes. It would not read well if you just copied and pasted that in like that. So you need to have 2 different paragraphs with each of those character counts for 3 of them. And then for letters of rec, if you have not yet asked all of your letter writers, you want to always track the letter requirements when you're making your school list. I would personally make an Excel sheet for your school list, and I would track a lot of information in your school list, including letters, but I would track outstanding prereqs. I would track, I'm going to talk about that in a couple slides, some other factors about schools, but make sure you have all this information in one spot on a very, detailed Excel sheet, because you're going to want to know this stuff if you are applying. If you happen to be missing any requirements, it's important to know that. All of you are going to submit individual letters since UCR does not have a committee letter or a letter packet, and that's totally fine. Each profession has a different cap on the amount of letters you can upload, but just when you see this language, and you may see language throughout the application process that suggests that you should have a committee letter, I want you to know that you are okay. All of the UCs do individual letters. I don't think any UC has a committee letter. So you're not uniquely disadvantaged. There's no problem. It's been like this for years. The schools, because a lot of schools do have committee letters, a lot of the medical schools just have that language on their website that makes it seem like you have to, but you don't. You really don't. All right, I want to talk for a minute about picking schools, because this is a very strategic part of the process. And you absolutely do not want to just pick random schools. So we should not be using our friend's school list. We don't need to just sort MSAR by GPA and MCAT requirements. There is some strategy to picking schools, but it really should be based more on who you are as an applicant and who you are as a person, and then what the school offers. And the best way to stand out as a California applicant to out-of-state schools is to really show your genuine interest in the programs that they offer at the medical school. So a lot of medical schools have tracks or special programs. They have institutes or even interesting curriculum. Taking the time to learn about every single school is so important. You need to go to the curriculum websites, the education pages. You need to read about the research, any kind of special opportunities that they have for their school students. You want to be able to talk about which ones of those closely align with your career goals. That is how you are going to stand out. And so how you pick your schools should be based on what the school has that leads into something related to your goal. So you're gonna find it much easier to write your applications if your secondaries or if your schools that you picked have something to talk about. So that's how I would pick schools, is try to find something related to who you are. There are going to be some schools that are just like good schools to apply to because they're really California friendly. Michigan State, Rosalind Franklin, Loyola, Thomas Frisk, these are very California friendly schools. And so, you might apply there and then try to find something that ties you to the school versus the other way around. But if you really are trying to fill in some schools and you don't know where to start, you go to Google and search up some concepts. So if you're really interested in addiction medicine, or you're really interested in global health or public health, Google public health medical school track and see which schools have tracks in public health. And that way you can try to find programs that you can talk about in your application. Okay, well, that is everything I had for the checklist for the spring. I will take any questions that anybody might have now about anything related to applying this spring. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, Joanne. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Could you go over the process of secondaries for how they differ for MD and DO? Because I think you said like secondaries come out the same time as DOs for.
Yeah, so in ACOMAS, the DO application, there's a spot in the primary app called program materials, and then there's a tab called questions, and that is where the DO schools add their secondaries. So in order to submit a school into ACOMAS, you have to first write the secondary. Whereas for MD schools, the secondary is emailed to you around the first week of July. So you would submit your primary to AMCAS and then get your secondary later. Whereas for ACOMAS, you would do the secondaries when you do your primary.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Well, next week we are going to be doing an in-person event for with med schools. I hope everybody can make it. We're going to have 3 different med schools there sharing their perspective on what makes a strong applicant. So you can join us next Tuesday at 2 p.m. in the Excite Room in the Riviera Library. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and thanks for coming.